Max Verstappen and Red Bull's run of consecutive wins came to an end at Singapore. The team, as well as the driver, came to Singapore on the back of a dominant win in Monza. To add to this, Max was on a 10 race win streak. Red Bull itself had been unbeaten this season. Despite all of that, as soon as the team came to Singapore, the car was nowhere. The drivers were struggling with rear end grip, and it was obvious from the very first session that something was wrong. And even though everyone expected the team to fight back, to show performance, to ultimately regain that position at the top of the standings, Red Bull was never able to accomplish that. As a result, a team and a driver that came to Singapore on the back of a 10 race win streak and a 15 race win streak, they went home without even a podium. If we exclude or rather ignore the late race stint from Max Verstappen, where he almost sneaked in and secured a P4 finish, the entire race weekend saw Red Bull not being impressive in any which way. The car was nowhere close to the top 3 or top 4 teams, and in the eyes of many, it was a major surprise. Now, there was another interesting thing that happened in Singapore, and that was the fact that the FIA technical directive was introduced and it came into effect at the same weekend. So, on the same weekend that the FIA directive is issued, Red Bull cannot even secure a podium. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. Right now, there are many fans speculating that maybe Red Bull was running an illegal car throughout the season and this technical directive has put a stop to it. Now, in this video, what we are going to do is we're trying to answer a critical question. And the question is that if there is a scenario where the technical directive ends up compromising Red Bull and pretty much leaving them in the pecking order where they found themselves in Singapore, then does this mean that the Red Bull was an illegal car throughout the season? Well, to answer this question, first of all, we need some background. First, let's take a look at how bad the drop in performance was for Red Bull in this weekend. Then we'll take a look at the possible theories that have been proposed by the F1 pundits, fellow drivers, or even team principals. Finally, once we've done both of these things, we'll answer the key question. That is, if the FIA technical directive was responsible for the drop in performance for Red Bull, then does that make the RB19 an illegal car? Let's take a look and let's try to answer this question from the beginning. Let's take a look at the drop in performance for Red Bull in Singapore. Now, to do that, we'll do a comparison of pace for Red Bull in Zandvoort and make a comparison with how the car fared in Singapore. Now, the reason why we are doing the comparison with Zandvoort and not Monza is because while Monza is a different kind of track and it is primarily low downforce, the track in Zandvoort as well as in Singapore, they are similar in characteristics. They are both high downforce circuits. So, talking about Zandvoort, in Zandvoort, the gap between Max Verstappen, who secured pole position, and Lando Norris, who was in P2, was roughly around half a second. Now, when we went to Singapore, Red Bull was nowhere close to being the fastest car on the grid. It was arguably 5th or 4th fastest car on the grid, and Max Verstappen could not make it beyond Q2. In Q2, when he was eliminated, his time was around 7/10 of a second slower than Carlos Sainz. And that is where you can see the drop in performance. If we take a more generous calculation, then we can say that roughly Red Bull lost around a second a lap in Singapore as compared to where it usually found itself. Now let's take a look at a few theories that have been proposed by different pundits, different team principals, as well as some drivers as well. The first theory, and arguably one of the more credible ones that I've actually come across, was proposed by Mark Hughes from the race. According to him, it all came down to the fact that the track in Singapore was a lot more bumpier as compared to what we conventionally see during the entire calendar. As a result, Red Bull, whose trademark has been to run the car as close as possible to the ground, was unable to have that kind of extreme ride heights. As a result, Red Bull was forced to run the car a bit higher, and because of that, it completely lost the rear grip. And as I think we all saw in the practice as well as in qualifying, maybe to an extent in the race, it was probably not that visible. We all saw that the rear grip was lacking, and that is where both Max Verstappen as well as Sergio Perez lost time compared to their competitors. Now, the second theory that was proposed by Christian Horner was more around the fact that Red Bull tried different things throughout the weekend, but somehow they were never able to find the sweet spot. That is what he came down to, and that is something similar to what Paul Monahan as well said about how the entire Singapore Grand Prix weekend went. According to him, Red Bull tried different things. They had a new upgrade as well, which was discarded after just the first session. So maybe something they'll need to look at as well. Overall, according to Red Bull itself, they felt that maybe if they had more time, they might have been able to dial the car in better towards the track. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get that done during the weekend. Now, final theory, and it's the third one that is somewhat proposed by Lewis Hamilton, was, well, he specifically alluded to the fact that compared to every other team on the grid, Red Bull is not bringing as many upgrades to its current car. It's primarily shifted its focus to the 2024 Challenger. As a result, while every other competitor is bringing new parts, maybe the competitors are now starting to close the gap. And Singapore was probably the perfect storm where the upgrades from other teams worked and Red Bull struggled. And as a result, we had the kind of weekend that we ultimately panned out. So that is what he thinks. Now, all three theories are somewhat credible, but again, they are theories at the end of the day. However, the fourth theory, that is arguably the more on the conspiracy side, is the one where there are people that think that maybe the technical directive may have played a role in slowing down Red Bull. Now, almost everyone has had a similar stand on this. None of them think that the technical directive could have actually done that. They are not of this belief, and many of them think that Red Bull will be back to its normal competitiveness in Japan. However, having said that, everyone left an open ended answer where almost everyone said that if Red Bull continues to be slow in Japan, in that scenario, maybe the technical directive has played a role. Now, in this video, we are talking about that particular scenario only. We are not talking about the fact that maybe these three possible theories that have been proposed are accurate. We are talking about something entirely different. We are talking about the fact that what happens if the technical directive leads to Red Bull slowing down and losing so much performance, a performance close to a second a lap. Does this mean that Red Bull was cheating in the first half of the season? Does it mean that the RB19 was an illegal car because as soon as the technical directive came in, the car is not competitive? Let's answer this question. Now, to answer this question, I think I need to educate you guys a little about how the whole flexi-wing regulations work. Now, these regulations have been in F1 for a long time, more than a decade or so. Even in 2010s, it used to be a major issue. Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, all of them have faced some kind of modifications and some kind of changes that they've had to make in their wings because they flex too much. Now, one of the major issues when it comes to flexible wings is that it is very hard to monitor. It is very difficult to simulate how a particular part of the car will oscillate or not do that specifically at a certain load or a certain speed. So that's why these particular tests, they keep getting modified from time to time, and from time to time teams keep finding more solutions that are in their favor and that they can use to circumvent the current set of regulations. Now, that is where my question comes in. These new regulations and these new directives that have been introduced, they are effective from Singapore. Before that, they were not effective. So if in a particular scenario where Red Bull does lose this much performance because of the technical directive, then it does not mean that the car was illegal in the first half of the season. That's not the case. It simply means that from now onwards, to comply with the technical directive, the car has to run in this particular specification. Just like last season, Ferrari lost a lot of competitiveness when the new technical directive TD39 was introduced. That new technical directive did not make Ferrari an illegal car in the first half. It just meant that Ferrari had to modify a few things to be legal with the new technical directive. So I hope that answers your question. Please like, share, and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.